So welcome everyone to the December Building to Net Zero Community of Practice. Encourage everyone to turn their cameras on and please introduce yourself in the chat. And feel free to ask questions in the chat during the presentation. So yeah, this meeting's recorded. So just wanted to remind everyone. And we have a really great session today. So the topic we've chosen today is working with contractors towards building with net zero. Um, and we've really chosen this topic today because we want to build better buildings. And building better buildings is really a clear path towards prosperity, stewardship, and community in municipalities across this country. We must strive toward building affordable, equitable, and climate-ready homes to increase jobs, reduce energy poverty, expand social cohesion, and mitigate the effects of the climate crisis. However, this cannot be tackled alone and requires municipalities to work with many partners. First of all, municipalities don't build the vast majority of housing, and we sure do need a lot of housing these days. And they need to work with builders, contractors, consultants, renovators, retrofitters, and many more industry partners when building that housing. And so completing these goals, which is really important, is just not possible without that meaningful engagement. Um, and that engagement involves understanding contractor networks, motivations, concerns, and how to effectively reach out and communicate with industry partners. And so we're really excited today to have Tanya Ratzlaff and David McMillan to present to us. David McMillan is a manager with the City of Toronto's Environment, Climate and Forestry Division, where he is focused on planning for low carbon development and energy systems for nearly 10 years. He works closely with internal partners and the development industry to achieve net zero emissions buildings. Currently, he is focused on delivering mass timber, affordable housing, and planning for large-scale renewable thermal energy projects. And Tanya Ratzlaff is the executive director of the Home Performance Stakeholder Council, where she leads strategic planning, industry program oversight, and government relations to advance climate action and sustainable building policies. In this role, Tanya brings together diverse stakeholders from government, utilities, and industry to build consensus and drive practical solutions in home performance and energy efficiency. She thrives on connecting the dots between policy vision and program delivery. For example, she led the development of the Home Performance Contractor Network, an upskilling initiative for home performance professionals in British Columbia, which currently supports over 1,000 members. And yeah, we'd love to introduce them and go ahead, take it away, David.
Thanks, Nathan. I'll just share my screen. And there we go. As Nathan said, David McMillan with the City of Toronto. So the spirit of talking about working with contractors, in Toronto, our focus tends to be building large things. And so for me, who I normally work with are developers. And what that means is when it comes to getting buildings to net zero, that means the actual developers of the buildings, the real estate itself, but also the energy developers who very often are the sort of service providers for low carbon energy to these clients. And so the reason I preface my comments with that is because getting to net zero really big municipal role is on enabling others to basically take advantage of the assets, the infrastructure, the land that municipalities have to help leverage that for climate action. And so that's a lot about what I'm going to talk about today. So I'll start, and Tanya will follow with some like direct on the ground experience with contractors. So looking forward to the discussions and to your questions. So just for some background quickly, you might have heard of Transform TO. That's the City of Toronto's climate action strategy. Basically, the goal is net zero emissions by 2040, and what that means in practice is widespread electrification, so heat pumps doing the majority of the work, coupled with renewable thermal energy sources at the building scale, so standalone, and then the district scale, as it sounds, things like district energy systems. It also means that obviously our local utility, local distributor, Toronto Hydro, working with them very closely to deploy distributed energy resources, doing a lot of solar PV and battery storage, for example, that needs to be scaled up dramatically. Then, arguably most important is the provincial role in delivering a clean electricity grid, which is mostly the case. As I'll show, we're sort of trending in the wrong direction right now, but the long-term plan is to have a clean grid, and that's foundational to electrification for decarbonization. So what that means is, in practice, almost 60% of our emissions, depending on the year, come from buildings. And really, to decarbonize, to electrify buildings, what it means is basically fuel switching away from natural gas for space and water heating to electricity. And so that's the goal. As you can see from the graph on the right, our efforts generally our emissions have been volatile in the last few years. And part of that is because buildings are really hard to electrify. It's not only that 60% actually come from buildings. The fact is, it's actually also the most challenging sector for us to move away from fossil fuels. Transportation is we're seeing the trends very clearly and moving away from fossil fuel vehicles to electric. Buildings are much harder to do, and so we have a lot more work to do basically to get on track to net zero by 2040. But as I said, it also depends on us having a clean grid. And one of the challenges there is that electricity demand is forecasted to grow significantly. So this is from the Independent Electricity Systems Operator from their regional resource plan that they recently completed. Forecasts are always often wrong, but there's reason to believe that we're entering a period of significant demand growth, one that we haven't seen for quite a while, if ever, for a variety of reasons. Just growth, electrification, large end users like data centers, things like that. So sort of the AI revolution. That's going likely to drive demand growth to a point where it could be double by 2050 for the city of Toronto, for the province as well, province of Ontario. And that's really important because
Je suis
oh,
un
thanks. It's really important because you know it's basically you're having to electrify while growing. So it just makes that problem that much harder, which is all the more reason why new construction we want it to be net zero from the beginning. We also have like aggressive energy targets in Toronto. We really want to try to decarbonize sort of the energy that we use for what's in our control at least. But again, as the graph on the bottom shows, right now we're entering a period of increasing electricity grid carbon intensity. That's primarily driven by the refurbishment of the nuclear fleet and the temporary reliance on gas power, on more gas power to deliver the electricity that we need. I say temporary because the plan is to refurbish the nuclear fleets and to bring more transmission to the city, but question marks are on timing. And so for now, though, what we see is emissions intensity increasing. I think it's basically tripled in the last couple of years from where it was at. Again, it's still actually pretty good compared to a lot of other places, but really not good enough when we think about our 2040 targets. So we have some work to do there for sure in terms of pushing the province, but also doing our best at the distribution system level to increase our carbon intensity. So with that context in mind, for municipal practitioners, I think the rest of my conversation is really going to be about what municipalities and practitioners can do to achieve net zero construction as close to it as possible. So in Toronto, we regulate what we can, and as I'll show, really what we're talking about is land use in buildings. In Ontario, it's not so different across the country, really. Municipalities have limited tools, but in Ontario, for those of you who are from, BC or Alberta, unfortunately, we lack even the kinds of things like municipal charters that you might have in some places like that. And so we have limited tools to actually, in some cases, implement some of the goals we set, which is a challenge for sure. But as I'll show, there's still a lot we can do. And on that note, really, one of the main things we're focused on is leading by example with the assets that we own. So at the very least, we have control where we own the land, own the infrastructure. And so that's a big part of how we're going to achieve our climate goals. And that's sort of leveraging those assets for others, primarily the private sector, to take action. And then when it comes to sort of how we scale that up, ultimately there are things like incentives and other ways we can enable the private sector to deliver on the goals we have. So find those win-wins where they're looking to deploy low carbon solutions and we can make that happen. And so that's what the rest of my talk is going to focus on. I'll go through some examples and yeah, leave you with some parting thoughts. So when it comes to what we do regulate, which is, like I said, buildings and land use, we primarily do that through what we have is an energy strategy report at a rezoning stage. So that's our first opportunity for basically all development to put them on a track towards net zero construction. But really where the rubber hits the road is with the Toronto Green Standard. That's at site plan control, so that's closer to sort of detailed design. That's where we have minimum requirements for applicants to achieve certain performance. The goal right now is net zero by 2030. That timeline's in jeopardy. Recently, the province has, as I'll show, made some potential proposed changes that could jeopardize that timeline. Fundamentally, right now, nothing's changed. It's still business as usual, and so we are on the 2030 timeline. But as we think about how to deal with affordability concerns, like we always have to be adjusting to make sure that we can build low carbon buildings, but also that they be affordable because housing and construction in general is badly needed. We also are working on regulations for existing buildings. I will say, however, that just this past week, we learned that this won't be moving forward in December. So our building emissions performance standards right now, which is basically retrofit requirements for existing buildings, is paused. And CBD as to when it would come back. And this is really just, as I'll show here, a result of just concerns, I guess, about whether or not it's the right time. And so, we're dealing with a multitude of pressures on our building regulations. So the Toronto Green Standard is subject to a legal challenge. The province, through Bill 17 and Bill 60, has basically threatened the Toronto Green Standard and actually already removed our authority to have green roofs through Bill 60. And so there are, and this is all in with the intent of making development more cost effective. So I won't get into whether or not whether or not this is the solution to that problem. But fundamentally, these are the issues we're dealing with. And then the latest is and this was our own choice, but to pull back on BEPS for now. And I just linked to an article in there. Maybe Nathan, if we can share this, so people can do further reading because it's fresh. But we still have programs for retrofits, but fundamentally, the big piece would have been that regulatory tool because voluntary moves slowly in our experience. And right now, that's not the case, at least in the short term. So then what do, right? The outcome is the same. We can't, or the objective is the same. We can't give up on this. So we've looked to optimize these green standards to make sure that they still work and that ultimately they are cost effective. And that may mean changing some of the targets themselves. But what we found through our work is that it's actually, you can have your cake and eat it too. You just need to do it in a very sort of strategic way. So when we set out to now work on, what would be a future version of the green standard, we started with the premise that they have to optimize for carbon and affordability. And so that means things like right-sizing your heat pumps, optimizing those low-cost elements like building form to reduce embodied carbon. And what we found is we can get basically pretty close to net zero just through some small changes that really, and I'll show on the next slide, don't drive the cost premium significantly. To get to true sort of net zero, it's more expensive. And so we're getting to things like full electrification, including no gas for hot water, things like real cost drivers like changing the wall assembly, swapping materials now to reduce embodied carbon. But I mean, fundamentally, what we're seeing is the cost is primarily on the non-fuel switching elements. So you can actually optimize for fuel switching. What shows here a cost premium that, when you factor in soft costs is less than probably 2% of capital. And that's not insignificant, especially today. But as we're seeing, despite the slowdown in new construction and the challenges in this market, fuel switching is still very popular. Arguably, it's a good long-term strategy. The question is, what's the right business model to help you make sense of that today? And so I think, the takeaway here is that there is work still to do on green standards. Even if you lose the ability to regulate, there are other reasons why developers will still pursue low carbon solutions. But I think if you are pursuing regulations as a municipal practitioner, I think now is a good time to consider what is it that you care most about? What is it that you can live with trade-offs? For us, that potential trade-off is honing in on fuel switching, decarbonization, and backing off on things like envelope requirements. There are trade-offs that you can still achieve your decarbonization goals and still have good buildings. It may not be the same trajectory you started with, but that's the moment we find ourselves in. So again, back to the notion of us working with energy developers to deliver on these solutions. The good thing about fuel switching is we're seeing that it's supported by the market. There's a business model that's driving this. Yes, our regulations help create the conditions for these companies to provide their services, but fundamentally, these are private for-profit companies that are delivering on projects. So we call it's not our term, but often referred to as energy as a service, third-party utilities, energy developers. These are companies that deploy everything from, standalone geothermal systems to large-scale district energy. But essentially, they take on significant portion of the capital costs, and it's essentially converted to operating costs, whether it's for the building owner or for the end users. But fundamentally, capital is generally the challenge with fuel switching, and this alleviates a lot of that challenge. And so we also find ourselves in a moment where if you can basically work with these market trends, I mean, a lot easier to implement in today's sort of context. And so we are finding a lot of success on the fuel switching side, working with these companies because they found a model that's palatable to these for-profit clients. And so that really helps us still to deploy projects without having to, rely on the most stringent regulatory models. We do have to offer incentives though, and we have to be smart about it. Because I don't have to tell any of you, but budgets are getting more challenging every year for municipalities, and so anywhere we can find non-financial incentives, we are pursuing them as ways to get that low carbon solution without essentially having to fund it directly or give up money for that matter. So one that we've deployed many times is this idea of repurposing your mechanical penthouse. If you're a developer and you're building a multi-unit residential building, normally your mechanical equipment would go in the rooftop penthouse. In the scenario where you instead use geothermal, which is largely at or below grade, the reality is, that space is now mostly freed up. Converting that to something more valuable like residential units, maybe even amenity space, that's value that is just based on the real estate. The city didn't have to put in any money. You get more housing units out of it. Arguably, it's a win-win. I'm not going to say it was easy for us to pull off because there was some zoning rules are not known for being the most flexible. We had to negotiate that. But fundamentally, we call these non-financial incentives because we didn't have to give up any money. And it's a win-win. It's value to the developer, value for us because we get the low carbon system. And I think maybe one of the most important things for a municipality is leading by example. Like, I'm not saying it's easy because, like I just said, budgets are a challenge. But anytime if you're building something, it's got to sort of showcase best practice. I think getting your house in order is a first order of business if you're going to try and pass requirements onto the private sector. So just a couple of examples here. There's many more I could take you through, but we recently opened the Mount Dennis Child Care Center. That's our first net zero building. And then another project I'm working on is it'll be our first or largest mass timber residential building, also net zero emissions. These are institutional and housing projects where the solutions are different, but fundamentally you can get to net zero. And I think for a municipality, that's key is leading with your own buildings. But what I'm going to talk about the rest of the time is enabling access to low carbon sources. So whether it's infrastructure or land or other assets, you control things that can be leveraged to reduce emissions. Again, assets, they don't even have to be physical. They can be digital assets. Information has a lot of value. Our approach has generally been pilot to program. We don't start anything unless we think we can scale it up into something because municipality, we don't have the capacity to deliver at a significant scale. You can do one large project, but it takes years. And so I think a key is to make sure it's something you can turn into a program. So in the retrofit space, most of it so far has been information. So we have, and I linked them here. So when you have the presentation, please go through them. Very recent net zero building retrofit guides, they're a fantastic resource. We do a lot of contractor workshops and training. So like supporting the people that Tanya would work with directly to deliver on some of these things. And then even Toronto Hydro, our distributor, our partner in this, they have their own clean tech services directory. We help them set all this up, but the point is, we're providing direct support to the industry, primarily through information, some other in-kind supports, I would say, to help scale up activity. And this is particularly to the retrofit space. For my team and some of our purposes, we focus mostly on enabling access to renewables. So in the information side, we have SolarTO, which is basically just a free tool where you can plug in your address and it'll tell you what your capacity is for rooftop solar. It's pretty basic. I mean, most we built most of this in-house with our IT team. It's using LiDAR data, which is readily available, generally speaking. And it's just a free assessment. We connect you with contractors, and we try to make the process as easy as possible. There are hurdles for sure. We're working on streamlining permitting and reducing costs with Toronto Hydro. But the first thing you want to know is, do I even have a good case to be made for solar on my roof? Well, this is something that you don't have to talk to anybody even to get this information. When it comes to the larger things that we focus on, wastewater is probably the most recent. So it's a resource flowing beneath our feet all the time. It grows with population. It's readily recoverable, not easy because it's significant civil works, but I mean, it's otherwise being wasted. And so we started off by mapping it and creating a free tool on our website. Again, you can plug in your address and see how close you are to the nearest manhole, and it'll tell you how much heat and cooling capacity is there. So that's available online. But at the same time, we have our first project that is just being commissioned. It's basically complete at Toronto Western Hospital, and we're working on the second one. We have to leverage city-owned sewers to allow a private company to connect to them and sell heat to a customer, a client. And so that's something where we have to participate because it's our infrastructure, but we get the benefit of, in this case, decarbonizing an entire hospital. It's over 8,000 tons of CO2 per year. So, I mean, these are the kinds of things that can be transformative, and we think it can be scaled up significantly across the whole city. And so we're really excited about this. But again, it's that enabling that's key. We use our lake. Not everybody has access to a lake, but you might have a river or other body of water that you can use for heating and cooling. And I say enabling here, we don't own the lake, but we are one of the entities that controls like the dock wall, the slips. And we have to work with the federal government and other agencies there to create a process whereby now others, after we did our first project, which is the image on the left, others can now replicate that in a streamlined way. A little bit different scale, of course, but deep lake water cooling, same idea. Enwave put a pipe in the lake that actually benefited the city because we needed a new drinking water intake. And they basically used some of the cooling, for lack of a better word, to cool their clients' buildings. So it's that win-win where you leverage your own infrastructure to help a private company deliver on an energy reduction and emissions reduction initiative. I mentioned district energy at the beginning. We're doing that as well in Etobicoke at a new civic center. We are working with Enwave, our partner in this project. We put their central plant in our civic center building, which is in the middle of the site. And from that site, it's geothermal. We're feeding all the housing blocks around it. So it'll be 3 million square feet that doesn't use any natural gas. I mean, that's the kind of thing you can do when you connect sort of real estate or assets with this private company. And there's a cost to it, a cost for them. But I mean, they need space and they want clients. We can give it to them through these sites that we control. So it's leading by example. It's using your assets for decarbonization. Again, some of it is just purely on the enabling side, but this idea of changing just rules. So it's not so much information, but it's just sort of policies that no longer serve their purpose. And a recent one that we did with our colleagues in Parks and Planning was basically to allow energy infrastructure under parkland. Obviously, a lot of caveats about not disrupting things at surface, and that's fine. But there's a process now whereby in the past there wasn't. It was basically banned. Now there's a process that allows it to be considered. These are the kinds of things that only municipalities can do, and it goes a long way to help projects. It does not mean that you forego any review process and approvals are automatic. It just means that now you have an opportunity to discuss whether or not a case has merit. So I'll say maybe the last few things I'll go through quickly. I think one trend that really seeing take off is this idea of sector coupling. So it's if demand is growing and there's a lot of pressure to build infrastructure to support it, and that's where a lot of the costs will be, you can use thermal energy solutions to actually help avoid investment on the electricity side, reduce demand at a significant value. Electricity infrastructure is far more expensive than thermal. And so there's a lot we can do on district energy and geothermal and other things to actually help achieve our electrification goals in a more cost-effective way. And so, like I said, sometimes it's called sector coupling, but essentially, this is what we're doing in the Portlands area. Portlands is an area that is largely industrial, underserviced in terms of electrical capacity. So instead of building all that electricity infrastructure, what if we could right size it based on having a Portlands-wide district energy system that provides the heating and cooling that's needed, but at a much lower demand than if it was all air source heat pumps at the building scale. Basically, whether you're using the lake or sewer heat or geothermal, it's just more efficient than air source heat pumps, which is what a lot of the demand forecasts are modeled on. So this is how we think. It's not entirely allowed yet. It's not, right now thermal is unregulated in Ontario, but we think that as regulation comes, this is an opportunity to basically say, hey, there's another way to achieve the goals we want, and it can be much more cost effective for you, the government, the distributor, the grid operator. So this is something we're working on, and I think it's pretty preliminary, but basically the modeling speaks for itself. We're seeing demand reduction in the range of 40% through better building efficiency and thermal energy solutions. So this study, if it's a study we commissioned, if you want to see it, I can share it with you. I don't have it up online yet, but I'll send it if you're interested. So I'll skip through these slides. Basically, what they say is the government is working on both the idea of sector coupling and regulation. It'll be some time before we see that in Ontario, but I really think this is an area where no matter what your sort of approach is to climate action, I think we can all agree that we want infrastructure to be delivered cost effectively. This is a way to do that because it activates the private sector and it reduces the investment from essentially ratepayers. And then we get the bonus of reducing emissions, really. So it's a different way we're looking at things in today's context. So parting thoughts, this is a bit of a summary. I think next year is a good year to recalibrate our municipal climate action plans. The concerns about affordability and our sort of economic uncertainty are not going away. Senior levels of government, so the province and the federal government, are focused on big projects, meaning less attention available to municipalities, which is not much to begin with, in my opinion. And then there's municipal elections across Ontario next year. Elections are always a time to be heard and to advocate for change. So it's a good time, I think, to rethink, what you want to achieve with your climate plans. I don't see any way to do this except alongside the private sector. They're bringing capital, they're bringing expertise, and I think government is strong when it's sort of working alongside and enabling. And we have our own expertise that I think actually makes projects better. So working with those market trends and strategic incentives that really don't cost anything. And the last one, like if you take anything away from this presentation, I'll just say, like, yes, we're lucky to have the resources we do, but we started as a tiny team years ago. It was only two of us. And you can do projects, even if they're small. They were tiny projects that we did, but they snowball into bigger things. So if you can try one project, no matter how big, as long as you can see a path to scaling it, I think that's the key to dealing with all of these challenges that we find ourselves in right now. So that's it. Nathan, if you can share this, people have my contact. I'm happy to follow up afterwards anytime.
Great. Yeah, thanks a lot, David. I really appreciate that Toronto perspective. Can kind of see where some cities are leading, and Toronto is really doing that on this example. Well, I'll go next to Tanya.
Awesome. Thanks so much, David. Lots of really interesting takeaways there. I'll just get my slides showing. Nathan, maybe you can just let me know when you're seeing that.
Yep, we can see it.
Perfect. Okay, thanks. All right, well, hello everyone. It's nice to have a chance to share with you. I know David was sharing from the City of Toronto perspective. I'm going to be sharing from the Home Performance Stakeholder Council, which is a nonprofit. I will add, though, that prior to joining the HPSC, I actually worked for local government as well. So some of the key takeaways will have a little bit of my kind of general learnings spread throughout. And as David mentioned, my presentation will get a little bit more nitty-gritty details on working with contractors and professionals in our industry. So without further ado, I'm just going to briefly explain kind of the scope and context of the HPSC. I'm sorry, I should mention we're the Home Performance Stakeholder Council. That's a big long name, so we go by the HPSC for short. And then I'm going to be diving into our flagship initiative called the Home Performance Contractor Network. Yes, those are very similar names and similar acronyms, so do our best to keep it straight. And then I've just kind of sprinkled some key takeaways throughout. And then like David, I'll share my slides with Nathan to share with others, and my contact information's there. So without further ado, I'll start by explaining who we are at the HPSC. So our focus is on home performance, which is the science and practice of building and improving homes based on the house as a system approach. So this includes addressing the building envelope, mechanical systems, occupant behavior, environmental conditions, and the goal of all of this is to make the home as safe, comfortable, energy efficient, and durable as possible. So as I mentioned, we are a nonprofit, and our role is to serve as facilitators for the home performance industry. So facilitating between boots on the ground folks, policymakers, that kind of thing. And we work exclusively with residential retrofits. So we don't work with commercial, industrial, and we don't work with new construction. We fill a really specific niche. And as of right now, we just work in British Columbia, but we're exploring expanding outside of BC, and we do already have a lot of allies and connections across the country. And then at the bottom of the screen there, it talks about our work, and our work spans a few different activities, but by far most of our resources are centered on the contractor network in the bottom right-hand corner there. So that's what I'm going to spend the rest of the presentation talking about today. So before I get into the network, I'll just briefly mention a few key takeaways from who we are as the HPSC as it relates to industry engagement. So David kind of touched on this, but I just want to spotlight that in this current political climate where certainly in BC we're seeing this, and I think elsewhere in Canada for sure, this sustainability versus affordability approach, which is very unfortunate. We at the HPSC really see an opportunity to highlight the co-benefits of home performance that go beyond the sort of energy efficiency and emissions reduction buzzwords that have been so popular in our sector for years. So those co-benefits would be energy bill savings for homeowners. That of course supports affordability, making sure that your retrofits in your houses are more durable, they're resilient, especially to climate change. In general, our work supports quality workmanship and having good value for money, which of course, again, also ties into affordability. And then other ongoing concerns that regardless of the financial state of our country should always be important for us. And there's always support for health and safety, and then of course, comfort of homeowners as well. So we've really found that these co-benefits resonate with contractors and homeowners, as well as policymakers and definitely funders as well. So at the HPSC, we've already been using this approach for years of highlighting all the different co-benefits and kind of shifting the focus depending on who we're speaking to or what we're kind of going after. And so we would definitely advocate to municipalities or other groups to consider pivoting your messaging in the coming years to focus a little bit more on these co-benefits as opposed to those energy efficiency or emission reductions, at least solely focusing on those things. So that's kind of our first key takeaway. And now we'll get into the Home Performance Contractor Network, or the HPCN. And again, I'm going to explain the network and kind of walk through it, but I'm going to sprinkle some key takeaways. I just thought that would be kind of more engaging. So without further ado, the HPCN is an upskilling initiative for home performance professionals. And again, it's currently just operating in British Columbia. It's open to contractors and energy advisors, and they have to complete specified business accreditation and training qualifications, and then they join our database, and then those members are promoted in a public search tool, and then we also continue to review them for quality assurance for the duration that they're members. It's currently open, like I said, to retrofit professionals in BC. We are very interested in expanding outside of BC, but for now, that's what we're open to. And we have 6 sectors, and going from left to right there, solar and battery is actually our newest sector. We just opened that in October of this year. And then windows and doors, HVAC, and insulation. Those were our original sectors that we launched in 2021, followed by general retrofit and energy advisors, which we also just launched in June of this year. So it's free to join our network. There's no membership fee. And I'm going to continue walking through the details of how the contractors or how the professionals participate in the network. And then, like I said, kind of have the key takeaways spread throughout. So to join the HPCN, there's a registration process, and it starts with a company representative submitting an application with some business information there. Once that's approved, the company rep then invites their employees to complete the qualifications. These are sector specific, so I'm not going to go through them right now for the sake of time, but I have included them in the slide deck if you're interested in seeing what those are. And then once the employees complete the qualifications, that company rep has to submit some business documentation. You can see some examples of what that is, business licenses, etc., and then sign our agreement. And then in terms of ongoing management, it's both the company and the employees that we're sort of monitoring, so to speak, ensuring that they're continued to abide by our network agreement and the training. So pausing for a moment to talk about some key takeaways. When we developed the HPCN and now in its ongoing management, it has always been very closely informed by industry. So that process for us looked like identifying sector leaders to participate in these volunteer sector councils, is what we call them. They're groups of boots on the ground folks. And initially, they meet to help us develop those sector-specific training requirements when their sector is going to launch in the HPCN. And then once their sector is launched, we continue to meet with them quarterly to get some ongoing insights and feedback from them, and they continue to help shape the HPCN as it's growing and evolved. So the biggest takeaway from the kind of initial launch and ongoing design of new sectors is that when an initiative like the HPCN is designed for industry, by industry, it's much easier to gain buy-in than having, say, a government or a utility sort of force what they think is best. We're often dealing with contractors that aren't maybe super excited to consider joining our network. And when we explain to them that it was their peers who developed the criteria, it definitely helps ease that conversation a bit. Some other takeaways regarding the kind of like initial engagement that we did for the HPCN is we made sure to involve a very broad group of stakeholders. So contractors, manufacturers, suppliers, industry associations, etc. You can see the examples there. And I wanted to highlight that for those first three groups, the contractors, manufacturers, and suppliers, if you're looking to engage with them, we would definitely recommend that you plan for a lot of resources as opposed to some of those other groups, which might be a little more quick and have more time and it's within their mandate to participate. It took a lot of cold calling. We showed up at their physical location in the early days. Staff actually road tripped around the province and showed up on contractor doorsteps to get them involved. And in terms of engaging with them, even now, even moving forward with ongoing work, it definitely can take a few attempts to invite them, to engage with them. And typically, if we have a really important engagement session, we might even call them the day before, the day of, just to remind them, this is important, you're helping shape industry, so please, make sure that you show up to this event. So just some really practical lessons learned from our engagement. So we'll keep going now to dive into why these professionals would even want to join the HPCN in the first place. We have a couple of really big carrots and or sticks, depending on your perspective. The first is that for the required training to join our network, we offer subsidized reimbursements, and all of that money currently comes from the provincial government, and that has been huge. We get countless feedback that is a major support for folks. And then the second one is that homeowners must hire a member of our network for major energy rebate programs in the province. So for energy rebates offered by the provincial government and by major utilities, they've partnered with us. And basically our network is the gateway to people accessing those rebates. And then some smaller benefits or carrots and sticks would be using our logo to kind of promote their membership, being displayed in our search tool, which is both on our website as well as the provincial rebate website, so it gets quite a lot of coverage. And then we also offer some other kind of exclusive opportunities for our members. So just to really drive home that last couple points that I made there, the biggest carrots and sticks for us have been partnering with other initiatives that hold a lot of leverage and brand recognition. So depending on your initiative, these exact takeaways may not relate, but I think the sentiment is partner with others, try and get that carrot and stick. And if there is training involved, doing your best to get the costs covered. And we also provide, I'm just seeing a typo there, it should say a wage contribution. So we also offer a small top up to try and recognize the fact that people are coming off of a job site to take this training. So however that might apply to your initiatives moving forward, those would be some good key takeaways. Pardon me. So in terms of participation, just to give some context, we do have over 1,100 member companies. So that's the number of companies that are members, and then they might have countless installers trained underneath them. And then we have another 1,500 that are still working their way through registration. So we are dealing with quite a large volume. And as you can see from the numbers, our highest participation has definitely been in the HVAC sector. We have a lot of momentum in BC for that, especially for heat pumps. And then for insulation and windows and doors, it's hard to know. We'll never know. We don't have the data on how many companies exist in the province, but we believe we've hit saturation with those. And then the last three sectors, like I had mentioned, are quite new. So we're still just seeing those ones come online. In terms of some key takeaways, I thought I would speak a little bit to rural participation. So our definition of rural it really follows our kind of provincial government definition. So I think it's like communities with 10,000 people or less. We've had a particular push. A lot of stakeholders have been asking us to try and get more participation in our network from these communities. So I thought I would take a moment to speak specifically to our experience if you're dealing with smaller areas. This has been a much harder sell if you're in a rural area. I'm sure this doesn't shock you. We have done things like offering a $300 top up on those training subsidies to try and entice rural contractors to participate with us. It really didn't move the needle very much. Things that have helped is having local allies that help promote. So for example, in BC, we have retrofit concierge programs which support homeowners through the kind of whole retrofitting process. So they've been promoting to contractors in their area to join our network, and then they'll also promote to homeowners, hey, if you hire a contractor from this network, you'll get these rebates. You should call up your contractors and encourage them to join the HPCN. And then the other thing we found helpful is in these smaller, more rural areas, if you can try and build a sense of competition. So taking the first few kind of leaders to join the HPCN in the area and kind of highlighting their participation and sort of making a celebration out of it. We've seen that it go from, we have nobody in this area, and then we got one person, and then suddenly the three other competitors start scrambling to get their registration. So building on a little healthy competition there. And then some general takeaways that could definitely apply whether it's rural or not, but we see the biggest effects of these things in the rural areas is just the market ebbs and flows. We launched in 2021, so we've been through the post-COVID changes and through the recent economic downturn, and we have seen contractors go from overwhelmed and busy to suddenly, twiddling their thumbs and trying to get customers. There is just a natural reality that we can't control those factors, and it's going to impact our initiatives. So something to keep in mind. We've also found that we have to be extremely consistent and persistent in our reminders and in our outreach to get people to participate in our initiatives. So in-person events, calls and emails, both automated and personalized. That's been really critical. And then finally, sort of related to my comment around the market ebbs and flows, there is the reality that we have not been able to move some contractors when the reality is they're overloaded with work and they have very little incentive to attract new customers. So from my experience in local government, I think the biggest takeaway from that would be working with your councils to help them understand this. You might have certain goals and you might have a budget and a timeline for your municipal government. And if they don't understand the reality of these contractors' lives, depending on the season, depending on the market situation, you can lead a horse to water, but they're not going to budge. So I would say that's a big takeaway if you find that's what you're facing in your community. So just a handful more slides left. This is the last slide that sort of speaks to the process of the HPCN. Just to kind of give you a sense of what happens once a company becomes an HPCN member. We follow what's called our contractor management protocols. And again, this goal is for quality assurance. So the goals of contractor management are the 4 bullet points on the left there. We want to know if there are any concerns with our members, and then we want to identify the appropriate either corrective or disciplinary action. So we might pause them, we might suspend them, or completely dismiss them from our network. And just to be clear, we do not get involved in project remediation. So very sadly, we just tell homeowners, thank you for your feedback about your experience with this contractor. We're not there to resolve the issue. Our job is just to determine whether that contractor should remain in our network or not. Do they need to take some more training? Is there any other disciplinary action that needs to be taken? So for the sake of time, I'll kind of leave it at that for about the HPCN, and then I just have a few more key takeaway slides before I wrap up. These are sort of miscellaneous key takeaways that didn't have a different spot in the presentation. So I've kind of put them into a few different sections. This one is regarding scheduling of meetings or engagement sessions. Hopefully you've gotten a good picture now of the types of engagement that we've undergone with contractors. So we've done a fair bit of engagement with them. And we have found quite a few little practical takeaways here. So I already mentioned the market ebbs and flows. Different years, different economic situations will affect their availability, but also the seasonal ebbs and flows. So we have heard that that's going to vary by industry. So if you're trying to get a bunch of contractors that do insulation and HVAC and solar and windows and doors together in a room at the same time, that'll be your biggest challenge because the different sectors will be busy and open in different times of the year. So just keep that in mind. And then depending on the size of your area, meaning your community that you're trying to engage with, it might be best just to go virtual rather than trying to get people to physically travel to you. That's going to save them a lot of time. And if you do go virtual, make sure there's a phone-in option, not just a Zoom or a Teams call, because 50% of the time these folks are calling us while they're driving on the road between job sites. So make it easy for them to get involved. Very specifically, we have polled people many times to ask them when they prefer to meet. And they have told us that the middle of the week around lunchtime is the preferred time. And this is a really significant piece of feedback I wanted to share because when I first started, both in municipal government and at the HPSC, people were telling me to schedule meetings first thing in the morning because their assumption was they're contractors, they're up really early, they're early birds. But when we actually polled them, they said that is the worst time of day. I'm talking to my crews, I'm setting things up for the day, I'm putting out fires. The best time to get a hold of me is when everyone's on their lunch break and I have time to engage. So that's one of the most practical pieces of advice I can share. And then in terms of trying to get industry to meet and engage, make sure you give them a minimum of 1 month's notice if you want them to attend an event or major meeting. We consistently have the provincial government or major utilities, I'm throwing them under the bus a little bit, but they consistently give like 2 weeks, 1 week's notice, and it really burns the trust between contractors in this group. Whereas when we give 1 month's notice, we've seen that that's really helped foster organization and trust with them. And then finally, make sure you allow for the different personality types that might give feedback. So, some of these folks aren't comfortable or might not even be used to meeting in kind of like a large group setting. So make sure you're giving them an opportunity to give feedback kind of after the fact. Just because they didn't speak up during a call doesn't mean that they might not have a lot to say. Nathan, I am keeping an eye on the time. I just have a few slides left, but maybe feel free to cut me off.
Yeah, no problem. Go ahead and finish and then we'll get the questions.
I'll go through these ones fast. So just some more key takeaways. Approach. When decisions need to be made, we have found that offering a straw dog solution, so a proposal of a decision, and then having industry comment on that is much more effective than bringing like a general question to a group and having open-ended discussion. So to be clear, I'm not saying don't have open-ended discussion. There's a time and place for that. But when you are looking for a decision, we strongly recommend bringing a proposal and then getting their feedback on the proposal. Again, being as transparent and communicative as possible is going to really build the trust, especially if you are a local government. That's going to go a very long way. They are often frustrated in the types of communication that government fairly has to do. Again, having worked there, I understand sometimes you have to be really vague, high level. So if you can be as transparent as possible and say, we don't know, this is coming, we'll let you know as soon as we do, they would appreciate that rather than silence. And then industry changes quickly, so make sure you're engaging often and double checking assumptions. We've started work on projects in 2021 and industry felt a certain way about the way things were going. And 2 years later, when the economic situation had changed, they had new insights to share. So that's why it's important that you're kind of going back to industry and double checking that feedback. And then a couple more in terms of awareness. There's lots of groups that you can use to kind of help get the word out about any events that you might be planning. If you're making any large program or policy announcements, we would recommend a 6 to 12 month timeline minimum. That might sound really intense depending on what program or policy you're planning, but with the scale of initiatives that we've seen, this is what we have found is really effective. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of pushback and you're going to make a lot more work for yourself having to address those concerns. Regardless of all of that hard planning that you're going to do, we still see people wait till the very end of the deadline to act on whatever deadline we've given them, if there's some kind of program change coming. So just prepare resources accordingly. And then in general, repeating messages often, sending frequent reminders for deadline has been really critical. And last but not least, in terms of general support, it is true there's kind of these rumors or assumptions that many contractors are still old school. They like a personable approach. They want to get on the phone. They don't want to be sent to a web page. We are still seeing this for a lot of contractors. Of course, it's not everyone. Doesn't mean those other resources aren't useful. Contractors already experience a lot of red tape through things like rebate programs, regulations, or their own credentialing for their trade. So we absolutely would encourage partnering with existing initiatives wherever possible to avoid requesting repeat information or giving the appearance that you have two totally separate initiatives that aren't kind of aware of what the other one is doing. Preparing lots of FAQs has been essential, and then making time for that outspoken few. I probably didn't even need to put this down. If you work for local government, you already know to kind of prep for this, but I just wanted to bring back that earlier comment I said where if you are getting some outspoken few who push back on your program or write letters to your minister, this is where that designed by industry for industry is really going to pay off. I can't tell you how many times that sentiment has got us out of a sticky situation, if not with the contractor, with different levels of government or stakeholders that we're working with, being able to go back to them and say, look at all of this consultation we've done. Yes, this is one outspoken person, but we can prove that we've done our due diligence. And that has smoothed over so many situations. So if there's one thing you remember from this presentation, David kind of did this, I would say mine is designed by industry for industry will really pay off in the long run. And then I can't help but do a small little plug if you're really intrigued by the HPCN and you're interested in learning more or working more together. We're very interested in open to that. We'd love to partner in whatever way kind of makes sense for you and our work. So feel free to get in touch. Like I said, I'll share these slides with Nathan and it has my contact information at the end here. So you can reach out anytime. And I know we're very tight at the end here, but Nathan, I'll pass it back to you if there's time for any questions.
Great. Thank you, Tanya. That was really good perspective from the boots on the ground approach that you've been doing there. We have a question here in the chat, I think for you, Tanya. Someone's curious to understand how rebate program delivery requirements using your network work with service organizations for energy advisors.
Yeah, good question, Bridget. So I didn't have time to get into this detail, but two of our sectors, energy advisors and general retrofit, they are the exception where they are not tied to rebates. So membership in those programs is not actually required. We as the HPCN are managing the relationship between service organizations and EAs. Basically, our takeaway has always been, who is the company that's employing the people doing work? So if that's a service organization, great, join us. If it's not, then it's the company that should join. And the service organization, we leave that relationship management with NRCan.
Great, thank you. Yeah, feel free to ask questions in the chat if anyone has questions. We still have a few minutes here. And if we don't see anything right away, then I just wanted to end on a few interesting points that I kind of recognized. David, from your presentation, really around that enabling the right development. And so the way I thought of that is making sure municipalities balance those regulations where they're stringent enough to enable the development you want, but not too stringent to kind of squeeze out the kind of that red tape side of things where you don't have that development coming just because it's too confusing to understand those priorities. Do you have anything more to add to that?
No, I'll just say that if any work on the regulatory side needs to be complemented with the solution. The worst case scenario is having strict requirements and then sort of leaving it up to the industry just to figure it out for themselves. I think it's my bias, but I think it's incumbent upon municipal practitioners to also help, in this case, provide that low carbon solution, so that you have a smooth process end to end.
Great, thank you. And Tanya, on your side, really loved the approach that boots on the ground and like thinking about where contractors' minds are at. And this seems like a really important approach that I know we talked about that you would like to see some other jurisdictions adopting that type of approach. Do you think that's something that would be handy? And do you see this as a good model for other jurisdictions?
Yeah, absolutely. We have already seen some variations of this. Sometimes it's conversations with different groups. We were quite close to expanding the HPCN with the support of Enbridge at one point, but for various reasons, they decided to put that on hold. And then I know that I think Nova Scotia has an initiative that is somewhat comparable. So if you're interested in exploring this for your own province or your own community, I definitely say it's worth a follow-up conversation because there's a lot more nuances that I'd love to get into that we don't have time for. But in general, yes, and we've already heard a lot of interest for a group like this to be either duplicated or just expanding the HPCN into other provinces.
Great. And again, thank you both for coming here. And it was really, really great presentations. Really glad to hear your perspectives. Just wanted to let everyone know that we'll continue with the last Thursday of the month in the new year. So this Building to Net Zero project is going till at least 2027. And so we're going to continue this monthly community practice and happy to have many other great speakers coming in the new year. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Nathan. Thanks,
Thanks.
everyone.
Take care.